So here's a question for you. You are considering moving to a place like Paraguay, or you've actually made the move. And now you're turning your mind to the issue of potentially buying a property in that place. My question is, how do you determine a reasonable price point for any property in a country like Paraguay? I'm not asking this in a rhetorical sense. I'm asking you quite literally, how would you go about establishing a price point if you were in a position where you wanted to buy a property in this instance, Paraguay, but any other comparable country? And this question has partly been prompted by a recent video that we posted in regards to a 10-hectare property that's in the precincts of Caacupé, and the price point for that property was around 100 millioni per hectare. Now, as always, there was a lot of great comments and differing opinions about that property and its price point. That's all good. Some of the comments went along the lines of, well, come on, Adam, are you for real? Or that amount of money in US dollars translates to this, exclamation mark, or that price is insane. That's all good. People can have whatever opinion they like, and the more opinions, well, I think the more chance we've got of weighing up the different angles and making the right decisions. But to those people and to anyone else out there, I do respectfully return to the question and ask, how do you come to the position that you've taken? Because it's my observation that there are many and varied ways that people go about thinking about this question and coming to their determinations on the question of price. Some people come to a place like Paraguay and seek out people who come from their country or look like them or talk like them, get their advice, and then promptly adopt that opinion as being their own. And quite commonly you see people who come and pay at a certain level for property almost solely based on the advice that they got from a person from their home country or someone that spoke like them. What that invariably leads to in many cases is that that person has bought in at a very high price point. There are a number of markets here in terms of real estate. I'll talk a bit more about that in this video. But they're at the top end of that market are the people who buy in based on a price that others have paid in a particular area. And the way it usually goes is that someone will move into an area and pay a significantly higher price point, and then they'll subsequently encourage others to come along and do likewise. So there might be a number of people who have moved into a particular area and created a certain price point. And that price point is valid until there's an interruption in that flow of traffic in terms of the people that are interested in buying at that price point. And the transition and migration of people coming in and out of any country varies. So I'll leave it to you to assess how solid that rationale is, because to my way of thinking, fly in the ointment would be if there was, for some reason, an interruption in terms of the flow of people that are willing to play that particular game, but you be the judge on that one. But then you have others who will assess a property based on the price that they may pay for that property in another part of the world. We not infrequently get comments along the lines of, well, that's crazy because in fill in the blank, Australia, the US, Europe, I can buy a property at a third of the price of that in the area that I'm living. So that must demonstrate that that price point on that property in Paraguay can't be valid. It must be inflated. What do you do with that? Because it is really not particularly useful, I don't think, to compare a property in one country and compare it to another. Because on the face of it, it may sound reasonable. If you're in a high-end economy, first world country, and you can buy a property for $1,000 a hectare, how can that property in Paraguay be $5,000 a hectare? Well, once you look into that rationale and you look where that property is in that first world country and you look at the property in Paraguay or anywhere else, you'll probably come up with the realization that you might be looking at a situation where you're not comparing apples with apples. It's just not a reasonable way to go about calculating a price, in my view. People can do it if they like, but if they come to me and say a price that I think is reasonable isn't reasonable based on that particular methodology, well, I will be respectfully suggesting that they need to perhaps reconsider the solidity of their rationale. But I think that, returning back to the property that I was talking about here, not to harp on that particular property for any reason. I don't care if anyone likes it or looks at it or buys it or doesn't buy it. It's nothing to do with that. But it's all about using that as a kind of a case study to just consider how I look at that property and why I think that it's at least in the ballpark, at least it's in the realm of possibility of being something that someone could reasonably consider and not be scum or taken to the cleaners. Now, the property in question, just to revisit, was a 10-hectare property within the immediate vicinity of Caacupé, just a couple of kilometres to the main centre. It was up on a hill, very much covered in natural vegetation and quite beautiful natural landscape. Price point was 100 milioni per hectare. Now, I won't show any property on this channel if I don't believe that at least it's worth showing. And there might be someone out there that might be perhaps interested in looking at a property like that and even perhaps buying it. And the bottom line for me is that any property that we show has to be within the realms of kind of reasonableness. I don't want anyone to be ripped off. And on the odd occasion, people have asked me to feature properties that I've gone and had a look at, and I've said, look, I wouldn't even turn the camera on because this price point is in the La La Land category of property prices, and I'm just not willing to go there. But with this particular property at 100 milioni per hectare as a starting point of negotiation, I personally think that that's in the realms of believability. How do I get to that position? Well, the first thing is I've lived here for a couple of years. I've been turning over many stones. I've actually bought a property here, so I have skin in the game. And I've seen a lot of properties put up for sale. A lot have been purchased, a lot haven't. In that kind of vicinity of this particular place, I have not seen any properties that have gone for significantly less than that. I've said in many previous videos, when I'm talking about property, I'm talking about property in this district that I live in, that I've spent a lot of time in, and I particularly value. And I've made a previous video about where we live in Paraguay and why we value it. So when I look at any property and give my opinion about it, it's based on where I actually am. And when I think about that property and think about all of the properties I know for sale or have sold or the ones that we've looked at, that sort of price point, 100 milioni, is a good starting point. And when I say starting point, I'm saying that in most property situations here or anywhere else, there's room to move usually. So I don't know what that would end up at. I don't know how much room that particular person would be willing to accommodate, but I would assume that that would be a starting point. Now, one of the things that we don't infrequently get is, hang on, you can buy property way cheaper in another part of Paraguay. And just like the person who's sitting in another part of the world, it's not really valid, because of course there are other places in this country, like there is in every country, where you can find differing prices for different things based on where you are, definitely when it comes to real estate. And this particular region we're in is not the cheapest region in Paraguay. But we obviously value it to the extent that we've invested in this area. We think that it's worth the effort and expense of being here, and that's our own choice. And everyone can make their own choices, and that's fine. But I wouldn't accept that it's a reasonable position to take that this property in this case, Caacupé, is inflated because you can buy land cheaper in another part of Paraguay. It's not really a reasonable argument, in my opinion. And this kind of touches on another issue that I think we see sometimes in places like Paraguay, and that is that we talked about people who come in way high on the spectrum, but we also have people who come here from other countries and try and come in way low. I've heard people say many times, I'm just going to sit off until I find that property that's just going to be crazy cheap. I'm going to find someone that's going to sell me a property for 20 million per hectare. They must be out there. Well, the chances of finding that are probably as likely as finding it in the place where you're sitting now. I would not expect that you are going to just find that just by clicking your fingers. But there is kind of a false sense of perhaps possibility that you might find that, and that's often based on the reality that wherever you walk around Paraguay, you'll see for sale signs. So you get it in your mind, everything's for sale here. It's going to be a piece of cake to find this incredible bargain, this Moby Dick, this mythical price that nobody else is paying. And I'm going to get it because I'm just a bit smarter than everyone else, and there's so many properties here, I'll just turn on the charm and I'm going to get that 20 million per hectare. Well, the reality is a lot of these properties that have for sale signs on them, they're not viable sales. A lot of them are either put up just for kicks. Someone has got a piece of property that they've never really thought about too much, but they thought, well, I've heard a lot of foreigners are coming. I'm going to put a for sale sign up and put some ridiculous price on it. Oh, it's worth a try. In other cases, you'll see a for sale sign, but a cousin's, uncle's, friend's, auntie's, brother's daughter has decided to put a for sale sign up after granddad has passed over. The only glitch is that the other beneficiaries haven't given the sign off for the sale of that property, so it's not really legitimately for sale in the first place. There are many properties like that here in Paraguay. And then you have other situations where there are properties here in Paraguay that are essentially owned without a title. People have owned them in the traditional way and they haven't been switched over to the modern title process. So you can have scenarios where you're looking at a property and there isn't actually the necessary paperwork to make that legal transaction. So that's why we always say if you're looking at a property, you need, as a starting point, a proper title with the people's names who are actually offering the property for sale. You also need an up-to-date geo-reference map showing the coordinates and the layout of the property. These things are essential and often not available when you go and inquire about a lot of these properties that look like they might be a bargain. So once you dig down and you distill all of the not really for sale properties, then you really do start to weed them out and it becomes a lot thinner. But what I also did, just as an interesting exercise, is I went on to a couple of the biggest real estate agent sites here in Paraguay. Something I don't often do, because if I'm looking for properties, that's not necessarily where I would look here in Paraguay, because I know for certain you're going to pay a premium. But just as an interesting exercise, I had a look at larger parcels of land in the approximate kind of vicinity, or at least distance, of the city centre here to these properties. And it's impossible to get oranges to compare with oranges, because I couldn't find one 10-hectare property anywhere in that zone. But I could find bigger parcels of land ranging from half a hectare up to several hectares. I did a rough calculation, and of all of the properties that I could find on the real estate agent websites, the cheapest property, if you calculated that price and translated it to a per hectare price, would have come out at 130 milioni per hectare. And in one case, I came across a property that was almost a hectare, approximately the same distance of that property. And this particular property was priced at 1,200,000,000 guarani. And just looking at it on its advertisement, I couldn't see how it could be that much more expensive, although it was a smaller parcel of land. So when you get a smaller slice, you're going to pay more for it. It's like having an entire cake in a cafe. You might buy it at a certain price. As soon as you divvy it up, it gets more expensive usually. So I accept that, but the point being that you can find property prices that are really quite extraordinary within the kind of precinct and distance of the property that we're talking about now. But granted, that property that we looked at the other day, well, it had some issues. It was on a pretty basic unpaved road. It had quite an undulation to it, so I don't know how much of the property you could actually do something with in terms of building or anything like that. But on the other hand, it was a beautiful, pristine bush. It didn't look like it had been messed with too much at any stage in a country that's been largely deforested. So it's not for me to say. There might be someone sitting up there in Nova Scotia who's watching me walking through a beautiful bush without being harassed by a Poindexter, and they say, great, let's go. It's not for me to put a particular value on that property. It's for whoever decides to buy that property based on its features. And everyone's different. But the point I would make is that if anyone asks me, do I think that a property like that is at least in the ballpark, if that's something that they're looking for, I'd say yes. And it's based on those things that I've mentioned. The fact that I cannot find a property anywhere, whether it's on a real estate agent website or anywhere else, that's legitimately for sale with all of the necessary requirements that you need in order for a property to be deemed legitimately for sale. I can't find any property like that for less than 100 milioni per hectare. I can find properties that are significantly more than that. So I think that all goes towards me saying that, at least based on my rationale, I have a case. Whether it's definitive, that's for you to decide, and ultimately it's neither for you or I, it's ultimately for the market to decide, because someone may pay that price. And in my view, the most valid price point is the one that people are willing to pay. Any other is just conjecture. But regardless of how you come to a price point on any particular property, I just encourage you to have a clear understanding and rationale as to how you go about it. Because quite surprisingly, it's been my observation that it's not uncommon for people not to really have a clear method or way of going about deciding what something should be worth. And that can lead to us just proceeding in an almost automated fashion based on what someone has told us we should be paying. And once you own something, you're stuck with it. And you've got to then rationalise what it's going to cost you to get out of it if you ever decide that you want to. Just all things to think about. And just another thing, when I talk about that particular property, again, not trying to in any way encourage anyone to even look at it, but you have to also consider a property like that has services running to it, it has water, electricity, all those things come with a cost and a potential hassle to get those things sorted. All things just to think about and take into account. But in my view, another reason to at least say that, yeah, at 100 millioni as a starting point, if I was looking for a property like that, I'd be thinking that maybe it's worth speaking to the owner and perhaps seeing what we can do with it. But one thing that I am really confident about is that anyone that makes the claim that a price like that is so crazy that it's deemed to be insane or that I'm not being real, I'd just say with absolute respect that until you bring something to the table that can validate your position, I would say that you're really probably just making it up. Because what I say whenever someone challenges anything that I'll talk about or a position that I'll take is I generally am inclined to have some methodology, and I always do expect that others will come to the table similarly armed, because that's what it's all about. I think we're adults here and we need to be thinking with clarity and purpose, and there needs to be some sort of process that we take, whether it's right or wrong, to come to the positions that we come to. And I certainly don't claim to have the magic formula. I just do the best I can, like you all do, and hopefully that's good enough. But I just wanted to make this video because I have talked about this particular subject on previous videos, but I don't think we've gone that directly to it. And sometimes people don't watch the previous videos. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that haven't, and just tune in to a property video that we might do now, and so they haven't really had the opportunity to hear my rants about how I feel about prices and how I come to the positions I do. So that's it for whatever it's worth. But I think it really underlines the reality that we are sometimes hampered by the prejudice of the experience that we've had in our previous life, because where we came from, you could get a price point down to almost the dollar and cent because there was so much data. There were real estate agent sites and government sites all ready to spit out a neat, reliable number that you should be paying for a bit of land in any part of the country. But there's a reason why that is, because there were bean counters and men with clipboards in various stratas of that society who had a vested interest in knowing exactly what you were paying, because somewhere along the line there's a lot of people clipping the ticket. But not so here in Paraguay. You put a property up for sale, you're often just dealing with the person that's selling it. You buy it, hopefully everything goes well, and you've got yourself a property. And the really good thing is when you move into that property, you're not paying a virtual rent in terms of some sort of lunatic property tax or one of the many other things that some of the nutcases are thinking about imposing in the various places around the world that happen to have royal families and things of that nature running them. We don't have to put up with that sort of crap here. We buy a property here and we pay really modest amounts for our services, and that's a nice thing. And when it comes to the issue of properties, just looping back because it's something I didn't cover, is that another reason why there are a lot of properties on the market here is because it doesn't cost anything to really put a property up for sale here, or it costs very little. If you want to list a property for sale in the place where I came from, you're significantly out of pocket before you've even made the sale. So you better hope that you sell the thing. There's a whole industry based around just putting a property up for sale. It's not so here in Paraguay. You can put a property up for sale and just sit on it. You can have it on an agent's site or be selling it yourself, and if it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's no big deal. But that all leads to the kind of crazy marketplace of prices where you can find a price point anywhere on that spectrum that is from crazy low to crazy high. And in my opinion, the best thing that we can hope for is to find a reasonable sweet spot, because although it's a nice thought to be able to come into a place like this and just buy something ridiculously cheap, even if you can do that, I don't think it's always in the best interest in terms of those of us that are coming in to be taking advantage of really low price points. But also equally, I don't think it's in our interest to come here and pay crazy high prices either. Because even if you've got the sufficient amount of capital to be able to just buy whatever you like for whatever price and not care, because it's not really touching your bottom line in terms of the overall wealth that you hold, blowing up a property market has other repercussions. And you can see that in some other countries around the world when it comes to people moving into a country and then buying in at price points that the locals aren't used to. It doesn't tend to go well. So regardless of whether people feel insulated to the point where they don't have to really care about this issue, I think that we all have skin in this game and it rains on all of us. So it's in our best interest to do what we can to find a reasonable point, a reasonable price point. And if we keep talking, sharing information, if we keep doing our own homework, if we proceed on the basis of caution and take our time and don't rush because there's no need to, then I think we're giving ourselves the best chance we can. And the thing I would leave you on is this. The greatest thing that you can do in Paraguay, in my opinion, is to invest in relationships. Paraguay is known as the country of friends. And that's not just a cliche. We've purchased the property and the people who are selling the property were actually friends of ours. And that meant everything to us because for a start, we really valued the friends that we had and we valued their opinion about this particular property. But we also equally valued their assessment and opinion of the people who were selling it. So it gave us that level of assurance because you do need to be careful who you deal with here. And you're looking as much for a good seller as what you are looking for a good property. And in my estimation, one of the very best ways to find a good seller is through a good friend. Because what invariably happens is you have a friend and they will often know someone who will be selling a property at a price that may be more in accordance with what is the real market here, what people would be really wanting to buy a property here in Paraguay. So you're not blowing the market up, you're buying from someone who has some reason to behave honourably, because behaving honourably amongst friends in Paraguay is a really significant deal. You don't want to be behaving in an underhanded or difficult way when it comes to friends or friends of friends. And I think that that is often underestimated, but often at the expense of people who don't sufficiently value that. We're so used to having processes and systems that just take all the risk and hassle out of things to the extent that we can just do it, often without even having to meet the person that we're doing the transaction with. And that can be done in a place like Paraguay, but you can also do it in another way, and that is a more personal way. That needs to be done with discretion and thoughtfulness too, because you don't want things to become too familiar. But you can certainly benefit from the situation where if you have a connection with people who are selling and you have friends who can vouch for the sellers, well, there's a certain level of security in that, because it's in the seller's best interest to do the right thing. And that has paid dividends for many people I know. And in our case, we just found it very reassuring that we were dealing with people that were known, and were known to behave honourably, and they definitely did. And now they're friends of ours. Outside of that transaction, good people who we know we can trust, and they know they can trust us. We now have some good friends, and that's one of the things that we most treasure here, because at the end of the day, I think relationships are the most valuable currency in a world where just about everything else is being tokenised. They can't tokenise our relationships, and I think we'll come to a point one day in this crazy world where that will be the most important thing that we have. Just my opinion, but it's definitely a currency that's worth investing in, particularly if you're looking to buy anything of value, and in this case, real estate. I think it's worth considering anyway. I think that this is a big topic, more complicated than it may seem. There's more angles to it, and there are many different ways to get it done. Enjoying this day. It's very blowy here in Caacupé. A nice sort of summery day. I've heard that there's rain coming, but today it's been quite warm, very blowy, and just a real contrast in some of the weather that we've been having recently. But as I say, I think that we're in for a cold snap. So I'm really going to enjoy that actually, because before we know it, it's going to be back to ooh la la, hiding from that really significant heat that comes in the summer months. But it's all part of the deal here in Paraguay. You take it as it comes. So until next time, take care. Ciao.